And we are live. Hello and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I am your host, David Poseidon. My co-host, James McVeigh, is currently buried under 10 feet of ice on the side of a mountain. Hopefully he will be thawed out and rejoining us sometime in the near future. Tonight, we have Brandon and Melissa with us. Happy to have them here. Tonight we're talking about, I guess the last 24 hours, we've seen a speech by Jeff Flake calling out the president for his I would characterize it as a war on journalism and a war on facts. That might seem a little politically partisan and hyperbolic to some people, maybe not to others. And then also following that tonight, just now actually, because we got the website to work, is Donald Trump's fake news awards. We're going to talk about that. And then Brandon, what was the other thing you want to talk about?
The Spectre and meltdown vulnerabilities in computer chips, particularly Intel and AMD chips.
Gotcha. And I don't know anything about that. So Brandon's going to be teaching class at that point. So that one's going to be on him. That'll be his baby. But let's get started. It was, and I read the speech this morning. I listened to a clip of it. This is Jeff Flake, who is a doctrinaire conservative Republican. He's not a guy who I like at all politically, really, but he's one of this, I guess what's been considered like the noble resistance amongst Republicans in Congress to Donald Trump / Trumpism, what have you. And, it's people like him and Corker and McCain and these guys who are basically speaking out against the president and showing, if nothing else, a little bit of moral character. Again, in my opinion, others might disagree. But I guess the question for me is that they're saying and doing these things, but how much of a difference does it make? How sincere is it? And neither of you guys, I guess, actually read the actual speech itself. But I guess to give sort of the gist of it is that, well, he did at one point compare what Trump is doing by sort of, I think the verbiage he uses is sort of reflexively calling anything that's critical of him fake news. And that I think it was at the beginning of the year, I think, or right after his inauguration, he called, the press like the enemy of the American people. And in that he compared Trump to Stalin, because Stalin used that same kind of verbiage, and just how sort of dangerous and scary that was. And one of the points he made in his speech was that it's actually despotism is the enemy of the people, and a free press are supposed to be, the guardian of the people by reporting what the truth is, what the facts are. But we live in an era of, and everybody, it's so annoying, that term anymore, right? Fake news, because now everything you disagree with is fake news. But we live in an era where everybody calls everything that they disagree with, not everybody, but most people, they call it fake news, and it's sort of been, pretty destructive to, being able to have a dialogue. And just from that level, so say he said these things, you guys, do you agree or disagree? Is it overblown? Is he just trying to make himself look good for posterity with regards to Jeff Flake? If he really means this and how dangerous it is, why isn't he running for re-election? What do you guys think?
Well, I can jump in if you like.
Go for it.
I think there's some validity to calling out the overuse of the term fake news, but I can also say that there's some validity with regard to there being a bit of fake news out there. And as you know, David, I've not been a Trump supporter at all, ever, from the moment that he announced his candidacy to,
Sure.
This present time. So I'm not coming at you as a Trumpeteer.
Trumpeteer.
Trumpeteer. But I feel like there is, with regard to this presidency, a little bit of a tendency for the mainstream media to jump the gun before they've really sussed out all the facts or even really kind of pieced the situation together. And sometimes they've had to backwalk or backtrack some of what's been said or recharacterize or rephrase. And I think a lot of it has to do with, Trump has pretty much laid his bed. So now the media is going to make him lie in it, even when there's no bed to lie in sometimes. So, I mean, you could argue that, well, Trump did this to himself, but I feel like there is a little bit of a kernel that, the media also kind of beats their drum a little too loudly sometimes to stir up that little pot a little bit. Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
I think I know what you're saying. The way, and this isn't a whataboutism, but like the media does have a tendency to pettifog, that they will draw attention to the most minute details, and not the media as a monolith, but you see actors within the media will jump on the tiniest of things and make a huge detail from, it was, Obama doing, a salute with a coffee cup or something in his hand. And that was, that was a nightmare. That was the biggest thing. And with Trump, he does some little thing that's irrelevant. He drinks too many Diet Cokes, and they glom onto this. And I think you're right that it does a disservice to serious journalism, to serious news reporting, because you're focused. There's enough. To me, there's enough genuine, important things that we should be focused on. The fact that, Donald Trump spends too much time golfing or something like that seems kind of stupid by comparison.
Well, it kind of harkens back to something that Lace said earlier this week on, I forgot what post it was, but she made a comment about how a lot of Trump voters are just happy to see liberals losing their minds, or their liberals being upset about, a Republican being in power. And I said, well, sadly, the converse is also true. That pendulum swings both ways, because, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, either side of the aisle. Whenever a liberal is in power, then conservatives lose their collective minds. And when a conservative is in power, liberals lose their collective minds. So to, on
Sure.
average, the general voting population. And I think that with the media, I mean, and this is not fake news, but most of the media tend to be on the liberal side of center.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we're always going to be at loggerheads with, even if it's a legitimate conservative side or a legitimate liberal side, we're always going to be at loggerheads on what is a fact, because what one side is going to cite as fact, the other side is going to call fake news, and vice versa. I don't know that we wouldn't already be here if it hadn't been for coining the term that's fake news. But I think that we've always been at this point. We just now have a name for it.
I think we have been trending in this direction for a little while, even before the last election cycle. Yeah. You have more and more people, they cloister themselves into their political echo chambers, right? And it's a function of social media. We've talked about some of these things before. That more and more you are attracted to the voices that tend to agree with mostly what you say, and you right. and you sort of instinctively reject the voices that are disagreeing with you, and you're more likely to take anything they have to say and reject it out of hand because it's them saying it, right? Because yeah. that's the partisan bias. So if you come at me with I don't want to say Wall Street Journal. I'm trying to think of a more like Fox News or something like that, with a Fox News article about something. I know it's going to have a Fox News spin. I'm already, I already have my guard up, right? Kind of thing. And I'm already resistant to whatever they're going to tell me because it's Fox News. Mm-hmm. And this is the same if I posted something from, I don't know, what's ABC. I don't know what's considered like HuffPost or something like that,
CNN or MSNBC.
Sure. Like CNN, HuffPost, something like that. If I'm coming at you with something like that, you've already got your guard up, right? I mean, that's just we're ready to discount it. But I think what's happened in this election cycle is that that's been ratcheted up because there has been a proliferation of actual fake news. And that's the sad thing about it is when that first came out, it's because people were trying to call out things that were factually not true, like, and not just not true, but like deliberate fabrications. You know, when there are fake stories about like the Pizzagate thing. You guys remember that? Pizzagate, that Hillary Clinton and I don't know who else had like a child sex ring in the basement of a pizzeria or something like that, and it was fabricated out of whole cloth. It was complete nonsense. That's fake news, right? When people reported on that, when that turned into an actual news story, that was fake news. And it takes something like that, and that's what that, you know, that's for situations like that. For the phrase was coined, but it's been co-opted now to mean anything we don't we don't agree with, right? Anything that we find as, you know, just partisan and biased and whatever, we're gonna say, no, that's fake news, and move on. And that's why it's such an annoying term, because it's become ubiquitous now. And that's, I think that's the danger of what Trump has done with that. The way Trump does it himself personally all the time, so maybe he's getting more blame than he deserves. But it's not just him. That we're many of us are doing that in the American public anyway. And in Flake's speech, he actually brought up that it's not just here, that there are in other countries. Duerte, if I'm saying his name right, the Filipino guy. The guy does all like the extrajudicial killings and stuff like that, because he's so anti-drug. Like he talked about, he's made reference to like sort of other world leaders that are kind of, you know, despots themselves, talking about stuff as fake news now, and that it's used as this machine to you know, obfuscate. And anything that's a criticism of these people is now branded by them or branded by, you know, by the government as fake news. And they're going to pass legislation in like Singapore. I can't remember where else. But please, if you get a chance to look at the speech at some point, he brought that this is starting to have like some kind of serious consequences. And that's really depressing to me. Melissa, you know that I don't comment a lot in the group, but when I do, a lot of times I'll comment like the "Make Facts Matter Again" kind of thing. And I did this thing with Dr. Gleb Sapersky and the Pro-Truth Pledge, and it's because it's so, whether or not you're left or right or whatever, like it's so important to be able to have a sober view of what's actually true and what's actually not, and be able to separate your own bias from what the facts are. And this ever-growing trend, you know, away from that, I think is just really unhealthy and I think dangerous. But that's my soapbox about it. But anyway, does anybody else have anything they want to contribute with regards to the speech? Did anyone want to talk about Flake himself, or whether or not we should take him seriously?
I suppose I could go for it.
Okay, take a shot at it, sir.
So first, I'm going to generally respond to the previous comments as a whole.
Sure.
So the problem here really comes down to tribalism, and as long as humans get into groups, then they will beat the war drums of that group and continue to separate and become more divisive. And it doesn't help when, of course, you have someone who's in the highest office of the land influencing that heavily.
Sure.
Not that Obama didn't influence that. Of course, he influenced it as well. Every president has influenced it to some extent. It's just we haven't seen this much of a hand from the top office get reached down into such, I guess, topics and or banter. Banter actually is a better word for it. And so that's the problem from a psychological standpoint, I suppose, even though I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. It is definitely a function of tribalism. But go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
All right. So regarding Flake himself, the man's not running for re-election. So that kind of tells me that he really has very little to gain out of this. And much in the way Corker had very little to gain with his comments towards Trump. You know, he just said what he felt was the right thing to say. Now, whether Flake is biased scum or whatever the right might throw at him, yeah, he's got his own personal bias, of course, but he's saying what he believes is right, and we can judge him based on that.
Yeah, isn't it sort of a sad commentary that the people that we elect to lead us or to represent us, that they only really say what they believe once they're finally at a point where they don't have anything left to lose?
This is exactly why the two-party system is shite, and shite again. You know, this is exactly why most other developed democracies, we're not a democracy, we're actually a constitutional oligarchic republic, but
well, I would say, yeah, representative republic, but I don't want to get into that. Yeah. Go ahead.
So that's why those developed nations that share our status of whatever symbol of government that we've chosen have multiple parties. Most European countries have at least 4. Some cases, there's some countries that have as many as 20. There's a few countries that have as many as 30. So it's not unusual for that to be the case. And this is why the two-party system needs to go the way of the dodo, and it probably is going to go the way of the dodo anyways.
Would you say, question, and I know this is tangential to what we're talking about, but do you think that the Electoral College would have to go the way of the dodo as well in order to effectively have more than a two-party system?
It would either have to be changed drastically or killed outright. Yeah.
Gotcha. Because that seems like sort of like one has been serving to protect the other for a very long time. I'm not just saying that as someone who's, not that I'm not raw about seeing two, popular elections in my adult life, my voting lifetime, go towards Republicans because of the Electoral College over the popular vote. But it just fundamentally, I mean, what it was instituted for doesn't seem like it's the idea that, well, okay, the population voted this way, but we need to be a check on that because the electors know better, essentially, than the dumb masses, essentially.
The reason why they put that in the party, I think, is actually working, because if you look at just the popular vote alone, then we're going to be focusing on 4 or 5 major cities on the coastal areas, and then you've got this large swath of America that's disenfranchised, and their vote doesn't essentially get heard. That was a reason why the Electoral College was put into place, so that large populous areas wouldn't be the only ones that consistently speak for the country at large. Yeah,
I think the way it is with Electoral College is that someone's going to get kicked in the teeth either way, right? That either your vote gets with the Electoral College. If you have it, the people who live in those cities, their votes get devalued. Your vote as an individual becomes worth less than somebody living in a more sparsely populated area, in another part of the country. Like, that's not cool. But then also, if we don't have that, then just by virtue of the fact that you live in a more sparsely populated area, you matter less, right?
A lot of those states that the GOP won this election round, Hillary never bothered to campaign in. Had she bothered to campaign in some of those states, we wouldn't be talking about
electoral Wisconsin. Oh, yeah.
So here's the thing. That's why it matters that a candidate does not just go to where the guaranteed votes are, because look what happened. She got the guaranteed votes in the places she was guaranteed to get them, but she blew off a large part of flyover America.
She definitely made some big mistakes there. Oh, yeah.
So I'm not going to sit here and say, let's do away with the Electoral College altogether. And I've also had this discussion with you guys after I got back from Europe, when I was talking about the Angela Merkel campaign, as well as that very young whippersnapper conservative that was just elected in Austria. I mean, all those countries have several different parties, and the percentage of the vote that goes for each of the party member is how that is reflected in their parliament as well. So it's not just, you've got two-party system that's reflected in representation. You've got a percentage of representation in who, like, let's say you had four people that were up for election. Let's say 40% voted for candidate A. Well, then 40% of the representation is that party, and then on down the line. We can't do that here because, like you said, we've got this electoral college situation. But the fact of the matter remains, we do have a screwed up two-party system.
Yeah.
So,
but
with the bathwater, why don't we have a discussion about what we can do to, I don't know, diffuse the tribalism and open it up to a three-party system without having to scrap the electoral college.
Three or more, and that's I think that's sort of it's funny that we've gone under. I think it's a really good discussion though. It becomes a double-edged sword, right, with regards to the electoral college, that if you don't want to be disenfranchised as someone who doesn't live in one of these major cities, right, you need the electoral college. But then if you want to see an end to the two-party system and have it opened up to 3 or 4 or more potentially, because I think we don't think in a two-party system, right? There's nothing you can't say, because I am a registered Democrat, that I therefore agree with everything the Democrat. No, they're the closest fit, because they don't actually fit me in my views and what I believe or what I want. But they're the closest thing I'm going to get, right? And I don't have any other options. Because people don't, and that's the part of the problem with tribalism as well, that you're going to be one or you're going to be the other. We have the two teams, red versus blue, and they're going to fight. If you try to have another team, you're just automatically smaller and you're not going to do very well. And it's been protected by, the institutions in place. So I don't see how we're going to break away from a two-party system unless we get rid of the electoral college as well. And I would like to see, like European elections, like you were talking about, Melissa, where if you garner, 12, 16% of the vote, in some countries, that's a pretty large margin, of victory, so to speak. Because, a lot of these guys are bumping around at, 6, 7, 8% of the vote. I remember when I was in high school, I was learning about, Russian elections and all the different candidates and the different views that they all held. And I was like looking at the numbers, and they're like single digits on the votes for final vote tallies of all these people. And there's not one that was like really strongly higher than the other. And I was looking, I was like, that's incredible. Because we're looking at like, 60-40 splits and thinking that's a huge difference, there it's like, you're splitting hairs. And I think that's probably for the good, honestly. And again, I'm not a libertarian. I have no designs to become a left or right leaning libertarian myself, but really, if that party's going to have a chance, on the national stage, I don't see how that can happen at the same time we have an electoral college. I don't see how they could have a chance.
Well, that's
because it's sort of this all or none effect, instead of just counting votes. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Because it's a pay-to-win system. That's essentially what elections we have here. You could almost argue that our elections are bought, and you might actually be partially right. Because think about it, all the campaign funds pretty much come from, the biggest businesses around, essentially. So you could almost argue that the campaigns are bought and paid for by the oligarchy or plutocracy or corporatocracy, or whatever word you want to throw at it.
Plutocracy.
So, I think the libertarians have an incredible amount of energy. Gary Johnson probably wasn't the right candidate in order for the Libertarian Party to progress.
No, he really. And it's fun. And I'll say, and as many mea culpas as I've issued for voting for him, I did vote for him because I didn't like either major candidate, and I wanted something different. But different isn't necessarily better in my case. So neither here nor there. But yeah, I would like to have more options than just here's the Democratic nominee and versus here's the Republican nominee. And I hate the Republican nominee, so therefore I have to vote for the Democrat, or vice versa, right? It's not what we want in politics. But that's what we've chosen to accept.
It's not productive.
No, it's not. It's not particularly, because look here we are. We had to choose between Hillary and Trump. I don't think that was as as tough as a choice as it turned out to be. But that's what we're really given realistically. And
well, it could be worse. We could end up with Oprah and Trump versus each other in 2020.
Oh, geez.
That's
Yeah, we can get into that
horrible.
too. That's another tangent we get on. And I'll just say this. It's funny because there's so much. We didn't do a hangout last week. And there's so much that goes by in a news cycle that it's pretty easy to miss. Yeah, the whole Oprah, I guess, tease of running for president. Oprah, don't do that. Please.
How would that be any different or better than what we have? We've got one reality star in the office now. Why would we have another reality, TV star up in there?
I don't think it would be significantly better, but I still think it would. Again, this is not an endorsement of Oprah. I'm not. You have to understand that I'm coming at this as a perspective. If I had a choice between choosing Donald Trump and a ham sandwich for president, I would vote for the ham sandwich. Therefore, Oprah would be a better choice for me. But Oprah, that doesn't make Oprah a good choice by any stretch. There's no, relative privation going on here. It does not make her a good choice. She's not a good choice. She has very little. I think she worked on getting one bill passed or something like that, and she advocated for it. And that's sort of the limit of her political experience. She's never held a public office, as far as I know. She has no experience. She's intelligent, capable, successful. She's all those things. And not to knock her success, because she's a very successful person. But those are not necessarily the qualities of a good president. And it's not because she's famous and not because she's rich and not because she's any of this. I need someone who understands policy and understands process and understands how government works and how to get things done in government. And I'm actually thankful that Trump is pretty bad at all of these things from what we've seen so far. Because I don't want his policies moving forward. So that's been, the silver lining, I guess, to all of this for me. But no, I don't want someone else who's just, popular and famous to run for president just on that. Let's not have that. That's a bad idea. And I've seen, the memes and stuff and other liberals going, oh, yeah. I don't think it's normative amongst groups of liberals and left-leaning people and Democrats that I've talked to, that there's not a whole lot of support for this. There is some support, I would say, that maybe in the fringes. That doesn't represent my views, and I think it's a real bad idea, personally. I don't want to see Oprah run for president. I would be happy to see Oprah run for, county commission or the school board or something like that. I'm cool with that. She can do that. I'm all about it, because pretty much anybody can do that. And let her build some experience. If she wants to get into a political career, go start there. Go start at the bottom like everybody else. That's cool. It's what I would do. It's what anybody else should do. Excuse me. But for something for presidency, no. Bad idea. So that's my 2 cents about that. I have a tendency to bury the lead a little bit. Sorry, Brennan, what are you saying?
Not only is her running a horrible idea, as previously stated, but she's one of those people who believes in more than 2 genders and kind of crazy sort of things that science kind of doesn't back up. So, if it came down to her versus him and there wasn't a good libertarian candidate, I'd go Trump over her every time.
Oh, well.
Because I fucking hate her that much.
I don't want to get into transgender issues with that, but I'll say for the record that I disagree with you on that, but I think that could be a whole other hangout just on that. I actually had a friend who actually stayed here when he was fleeing the was it the floods or the hurricane or something in Florida this summer, and it was going to have him on and do a podcast episode about sort of experiences as a trans man, but was a trans man and a friend of ours from the show and the group and stuff like that, Eli. But anyway, not going there tonight. Let's get back to fake news and Trump and Flake and all that stuff. And I think I agree with you that it is a sad fact of reality that when we are in this 2-party system, you are locked into playing the game and being sort of a company man in order to stay in power if you want to get reelected, right? because most of what you're doing is to make sure that you don't lose your seat in the next election cycle. And that way, the only people who can act with any kind of character are the people who are leaving and they don't have anything else to lose, really, and they get to get their parting shots off for posterity. And I think we're seeing that with Corker and Flake and McCain, and there's a lot I disagree with McCain, but I think he's a good and honorable man. And the crap he was through in the military and stuff like that. He's a person I think worthy of my respect, even though I don't really agree with very much of his politics. And I think he's been a little bit more outspoken, but when it comes down to it, how did these people vote on the tax bill? So it's, you have to hold those things in balance, or at least I do, given my own position. But so Flake said that. You guys want to segue now to the fake news awards?
Sure. Because
we were talking about, I guess earlier when we were getting started here, that, everything I disagree with is fake news, right? Everything you disagree with is fake news. If it's MSNBC, it is therefore fake news. If it's Fox and Friends, it's therefore fake news. And that's not it. I mentioned, where the term was coined and for what, and the fact that that's been co-opted to mean whatever I disagree with is a big part of the problem. And I was skimming through, what it was a Fox News article because there's nothing I could find on it, because it was like, where's the fake news awards? Is it going to be a show? Is it, and a lot of the talk show hosts and stuff like that have been joking about getting their tuxedo and all this stuff. And they're all kind of poking fun at it. But basically Donald Trump, he tweeted out some stuff, and then GOP.com came out with, I guess, a list of things that Trump has awarded as, fake news awards or nominees or what have you. And that's been sort of broadcast out through Fox. Surprise. And a lot of what I saw was like, okay, this is inaccurate reporting on something, or they got the statistics on this thing wrong. And to me, it's, and I don't want to necessarily, I'm trying to think about a right way to say this, because there's such a thing as an etymological fallacy. Like how a term is commonly used is how you should expect to use it in conversation. And the origins of a word are not necessarily descriptive of how it's used, right? However, the word fake means something to all of us. It means phony, it means false. And there's a difference between being phony and false and being, sincere in the attempt, but getting it wrong or being inaccurate. And much of what's been labeled in from what I've seen in these awards is, it's not people making up stories, a la Pizzagate, like out of whole cloth. Like they're reporting on a statistic or making a prediction, and that ending up being wrong. There's a difference between being wrong and being a liar. That's been, I think, a big problem in politics in general over the last, decade, that, a political promise was made and it wasn't kept, so therefore he's a liar or she's a liar. It's not necessarily the same thing, right? That, you can be wrong, you can try to do something and fail at it, right? That doesn't mean you were lying when you said you were trying to do it. And most of the time, and this is important to point out, the more rigorous journalists and the more rigorous news agencies, the ones that I would think are a bit more respectable, that when they come out with something and it turns out to be wrong, they issue a retraction or they issue an apology, and they say, we got this wrong, or they update what they're doing. And they're saying, this was actually inaccurate. We have to come out and let you guys know that this is the truth. Okay. That we got this wrong. And here's what's right. And they do this, but that gets ignored almost every time. And it's deeply disturbing that people hang on errors and they treat them as equivalent to lies. And that's most of what the fake news awards comprises of, things that news agencies have been caught, or journalists have been caught out. Some are named specifically. I don't want to switch tabs here, but I could look up some of the names. But it's guys from like CNN and New York Times and Time Magazine and news agencies like this, or media outlets like that. and they got something wrong, and now they're being labeled as fake news. And that's not what fake means. And I just wonder how much that matters to, we don't have any, what do you call them? Trumpet Ears, Melissa?
Yeah. That, I guess that Trumpsters, Trumpeteers, all those derogatory.
The true Trump base. There's nobody here sort of to hear this, but it deserves, because I don't think that the nuance between fake and wrong is really something that gets acknowledged when these terms are used, and I think that's deeply problematic. So that it seemed like it comprised most of the fake news awards is stuff people got wrong, and probably most or all of which was corrected after the fact when the error was realized. But that doesn't matter.
That may well be true, right? But my problem with corrections or retractions is the error is usually on the front page. The retraction / correction is usually like buried on page 6 in the corner of a newspaper. So that's that whole erroneous reporting is what lives in infamy, not that retraction or correction.
Exactly. They did. This reminds me of something. This was back. It was something I had read back during the last, election cycle, the 2016 election cycle, is that they came out years ago, and I can't remember. It was some gubernatorial race or something like that, like a couple of decades ago. And they did this, like, somebody came out with a story that some candidate was like a pedophile or something like that. And it was completely fake, right? It wasn't true at all. And then they came out with a retraction. Oh no, we got that wrong after the fact, but it was intended as part of a smear campaign. What was remembered was that he was accused of being a pedophile. This guy, I can't remember who it was. So please don't hammer on me with that. If you really want me to look it up, I can try and go dig it up. But what was remembered that he was accused of being a pedophile, and what was not remembered is that the people who accused him later came out and retracted that and admitted it was an error. And it was some commercial or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. Sexual assault of a minor, something like that. But nobody remembers the retraction, right? Everybody remembers, the audacious, awful thing that this person was accused of, and that had the impact on the polls, and the retraction had no impact on the polling because it was largely ignored. So I think you have a point there, Melissa. That I think it's sort of like this shameful thing almost, or it's not sexy, right, to admit that you screwed something up, and so it's on the 7th page where nobody's going to read it.
Well, that's why I always say, a lot of this comes out because, and they have to go and when I was saying earlier in this broadcast, they have to go in and then walk something back because they jump the gun because they're too eager to make someone look bad, and most of the times it is Trump, and most of the times probably he does deserve it. But then they jump the gun because they either want to be the first to report it or because they want it to be as salacious as possible, but they don't do due diligence and research. I remember back, during the Cronkite era, journalism meant something. And today, I don't think there are any legitimate, serious journalists anymore because they're not out to report the facts. They're just out for the salacious sensationalism of the headline, and they don't give a rat's hairy ass whether any of it, researched properly.
And I think there's elements of that are definitely true.
Both sides of the political aisle. I'm not just saying one side does it. I'm saying they all do it because they want the greedy, grimy,
They want the dirt. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's sensational, it sells.
If it bleeds, leads.
Right. Those things are true. And I think there's a couple of factors. You're right. There's a sensationalism because, essentially you're also in marketing when you're in journalism, right? You have to sell this newspaper. You have to sell this blog. You have to sell whatever it is. And also you want to be first because it's a competition. You're competing, if you're ABC, you're competing with NBC, CBS, CNN, all these guys, you want to be first. And sometimes, people pick speed over accuracy, and that's a problem.
That's a big problem.
But it's on the other side of that. I've known journalists, and most of them, in my experience, are sincere people. There was in Flake's speech, he talked about the number of journalists that have been killed overseas, or have been kidnapped and tortured, and things like. These people aren't doing this to sell fake bullshit to people, right? These people died. If you guys ever get to go to DC, and it's one of the few museums I think you have to actually pay to get into, but it's called the Newseum. It's the News Museum in DC. It's off I can't remember which street it's off of, but you can look it up. It's not hard to find. It's not too far from the National Mall. But you go in there and they have a wall basically of all the journalists that have been killed, sort of in the line of quote unquote duty of trying to report the news, of trying to get to the truth of situations. And that these people have come to a bad end because of it. I don't think people die for something they don't believe in. I can't imagine somebody getting themselves killed over trying to create a fake story or a bullshit puff piece, right? These people were doing serious work because it was something that they really believed in, and I hate to use the word ultimate sacrifice because it sounds cliche. But there's a wall of people who are dead because of them trying to report facts, and I don't want to dishonor that by saying journalism is all that way. There are journalists that are that way, certainly. There are journalists that propagate just fake bullshit because they know it sells, because it's clickbait, because it doesn't matter if you're intellectually dishonest, you're making money, right? There is that element, and it disgusts me. But on the other hand,
the reason why I'm classifying it as such is, we've moved well beyond the Walter Cronkite of respectable journalism into the Brian Williams type of journalism where I'm just going to say shit because it sounds good.
Yeah, no, and that exists, and it does exist on both sides. I don't want to get into a side argument as to why that's so asymmetrical, but
that's the point. That's true. I mean, but, not all journalists are the Daniel Pearls of this world, basically.
Right. Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, you can continue because you're perhaps more familiar with.
Oh no, it's fine. I have a tendency of talking over people sometimes. I'm trying to be careful about that.
Well, actually, I just did that, so.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Don't worry about it, Brandon. So if you want to jump back to it, that's fine. But sure. Otherwise, what's my train of thought here? Like I said, in Flake's speech, he talked about he'd actually cited the number, and it wasn't a small number. It was I want to say somewhere around 100 or something like that. Journalists have been killed, within the last year. That it's sort of an escalating problem. But you're right. I think people don't respect normatively don't respect journalism like they used to, and there are good reasons why they don't. But it doesn't mean that there aren't respectable journalists out there. And it comes down to, an adherence and devotion, really, if we can put it in almost religious terms, devotion to truth over falsehoods. And it's going to let a person sort out what is real news and what is fake news. Who is sincerely reporting, what the facts are to the best of their knowledge and ability, and who's, pushing sensational crap, which is why, I have, not much more respect for MSNBC than I do Fox News, because they're almost two sides of the same coin. From my interview, when I talked about this Gleb Sapersky guy, who's a doctor of, I think, behavioral economics, and he did the pro-truth pledge and stuff like that. And one of the things that he pointed out in that interview, if you guys get to check out the podcast, I'm going to plug the podcast. If you guys get to check that out, he talks about, where we start to run into trouble is when you engage in, when news outlets are engaged in editorializing and punditry. When you're not getting the facts as they are versus what the writer or what the reporter thinks of the facts, and they start to give you their version of it. They start to give you what they think about it or what they think the consequences of the thing are. When you get into that, that's when you start to go astray, because now you're listening to that person and you're starting to belong to that person's echo chamber rather than just trying to understand what's true and what's not true. And that's the problem. And it's, I love to bag on like Breitbart and Fox News, but like we have our problems too on the left. Like I said, MSNBC, I have almost no respect for them. When you see like the online media, like Occupy Democrats, HuffPo editorializes a lot. I'm not necessarily saying that they're, to the level of being completely factually inaccurate. I don't see that as symmetrical, but it is definitely a problem that occurs on both sides. But the editorializing, the punditry is a problem. The bias is a problem. The overt bias is a real problem if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody that you don't see eye to eye with politically, because you're coming from this tribe and they're from that tribe. And you've already, like I said at the beginning, you've already got your defenses up. And when you come at me with an article from like the Daily Wire or something like that, and talking about, oh yeah, what about this? Like, I'm not even going to read that. I'm not even going to respect it, right? So we're already stopped in terms of trying to have a dialogue. Because now, if you're talking about an issue, I have to go find it from another media outlet. And if I can't find it from another media outlet, and I try to be careful that it's not one that's just as bad, just on the other side. If I can't find it anywhere, I'm just not going to pay attention to what you're saying. I'm guessing that probably happens on the other side as well. That when you see somebody, Melissa, you talked about having some liberal friends that had some very bad ideas, I think, including wanting Oprah to run for president, and I don't know what else. I can imagine that they're also living in some kind of echo chamber. I do this because I'm trying to have a little bit of a bipartisan approach here. And I've encountered other liberals who are like, people I talk to through, I'm involved with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and I go to events and stuff like that. And I talk to people, and I have these little pocket constitutions I'm trying to hang out. I'm trying to hand out or in flyers about, church-state separation issues. I'm trying to hand them out to people, and they're like, oh, I already know, I'm on board, you're preaching to the choir. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get that. But, maybe there's somebody who doesn't necessarily see or understand what the issue is, or maybe they're on the other side, and they completely disagree with you. Maybe this is some information that they, might be thought-provoking for them. And they would say, oh, well, I don't really have any friends like that. I don't really talk to anybody who doesn't see, who doesn't agree with me, kind of thing. And I'm like, and I just looked at it, and, I look at some of these people, I go, really? You're that insular that, you can't interact with people who don't agree with you on pretty much everything. That's as dangerous as people who, watch InfoWars all day long and they won't talk to anybody who doesn't, agree with, their conspiracy theories. Like it's dangerous, and it is on both sides. I don't think it's symmetrical. I think factually there's more on the right than on the left, and that's not the, jab at anybody. I think that's just the way it is. But it is a problem, and it's a growing problem. And we see steps like this. People who, people like me who championing Makes Facts Matter again, and the Pro-Truth Pledge, and trying to get back to sincere journalism. We see these things, and I think they're corrective steps, but it's an uphill battle. We definitely have our work cut out for us because people have already cloistered themselves into their echo chambers, and we're so motivated by hatred for the other team, basically. We saw that in the group, didn't we, Melissa? Not too long ago. People going, oh, that's your president. Yeah, that must just burn your biscuits. Like,
oh, David, they're still doing it today.
I'm sure they are.
Governor was still across the post a few minutes ago.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's why I don't comment on there much, because fucking social media makes assholes of everybody. And Melissa, I'm not least among those. So I try not to get dragged down into it. What's up, Brandon?
This is the problem with the internet as a whole, is when you can just spin up a blog and spout whatever shite you feel like. Yeah, exactly. It's really easy to set up a blog. I know. I set one up and I run one. So the tech blog, not a political blog, but
sure.
And these are the fundamental issues of just both exploiting human psychology, the money-making aspect of clickbait and all that. And that's really becomes the difference between respectable journalism and irreverent bullshit. Is kind of those who are willing to go with the more business clickbaity kind of salacious, I believe that was a word used earlier, stuff, versus the people who are willing to die for what they believe in. And it's about the belief system and less about the money making. The money making, kind of comes along with it. It tags along for the ride, but it's not the focus.
Right. Ideally, you engage in any profession, any career that it's hopefully this is something that you're passionate about personally, right? And you're hoping to find something that you love that can pay your bills. That's the way I look at it anyway. And that's the idea behind it. But you're right. The money can come first. You can make a lot of money by saying stuff that people want to hear. And it doesn't matter so much whether or not you personally believe in it. Or you might find, yourself, because you're rewarded financially for saying and doing certain things. You might buy into it yourself. I've seen this with some guys that, that I used to respect a lot. I respect a little bit less now, that are podcasters and personalities, kind of two bigger time atheist podcasts. You may have never heard of David Smalley, but he's one, and I still like him. I still agree with certain things he says and certain things that he says politically. I disagree with a lot, and I think it's this appeal to the center as a popular position, because the left is too far left now and the right's too far right. So let's do the center. And I think he does this both sidesism that I don't particularly respect. But he does it, I think, and he gets a lot of popularity for it. And then there's Sam Harris, who you may have heard of. Yes. He was one of the four horsemen of new atheism, and he was very much bagging on the major religions following 9/11 and stuff like that. And he rose to popularity because of that. But he entertains a lot of what some people call like classical liberal ideology, which is the same thing as saying conservative. And things that are very sort of antithetical to what I think are well justified positions. And I think a lot of it, because he's not like us. He's not like Fermenting Opinions. He has a viewership probably in the millions, or hundreds of thousands at least. He's a very popular guy. And he's got his Patreon. He's got all these things. And he says stuff for appeal. And I think, and he entertains a lot of guys like Jordan P. Peterson, Dave Rubin. He's had, I can't remember who else, but a lot of the basically conservative pundits that I think are
Joe Rogan.
Shameless. Joe Rogan, I like some things Joe Rogan says. Other things I don't really give much truck with. But I think he's trying to nose out the bullshit. Like he's really trying to sniff it out. But sometimes I don't know. And I think that's a good approach. Like I like some things he says, some things he says I don't like. It's not just I'm a Joe Rogan fan, so I'm going to agree with everything he says. Same with Sam Harris. There's some things that he says, and some of his philosophies that I really agree with. Some things he says politically I think are absolute garbage, and it's almost embarrassing that he says them. And that and it makes me wonder: has he put his popularity? Has he put monetizing his product and the curated image he has of himself as a public figure? Has he put that in front of well justified positions and his own sincerity? I really, it's hard to tell, but it's been a little bit disappointing. Say again.
Perhaps he's trying to be offensive to some extent.
Yeah, maybe maybe being a little bit provocative. Sure, and I got to admit, I think anybody who's in media at all, and I guess technically I am because I'm doing this, we can be guilty of, if you're, because you're also in marketing, anything you do. When I, write the title of a podcast episode, I did one episode. It was funny because I got reactions from it. It was called Punching Nazis for Fun and Justice. And there was a guy taking the side, taking the side of should you punch a Nazi? And he was trying to defend, the position of, yes, you should punch Nazis, but you have to make sure that they give you a reason and all this other stuff. But like, he's essentially defending, Nazi punching. I disagreed with him, and I still do. But I made that the title of the episode, Punching Nazis for Fun and Justice. And we had a conversation, and I'm interviewing him. I'm not there to prove him wrong. And he gave his opinion. I gave mine, and don't know if we came into consensus or not. But anyway, that was the name of the title because, well, it's a little bit clickbaity, isn't it? It's the guy's talking about punching Nazis. Does the Fermenting Opinions podcast support punching Nazis? I need to know, right? So let's tune in, kind of thing. Like they do that to an extent, but like, you listen to it. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it to you guys whether or not you want to call it clickbait. But it was really funny because following that episode, I had a ton of alt-right trolls show up on my YouTube feed and people can comment on the podcast episodes when they come up on the website, and it's just saying just awful shit, as I'm sure you can imagine, as they do. And that's all been deleted, and those people have been blocked at this point. But like, it got a reaction, didn't it? So I don't know, like maybe I'm a little bit guilty of it too. Maybe I need to be more circumspect in my approach as well. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that there's a time and a place to be a little bit, I don't know, I'm not, scintillating is not really the right word. There's a time and place to be provocative, but I think that when it comes to mainstream media, I have a problem with that. Now, titling a Fermenting Opinions episode "Punching Nazis for Fun and Justice" is one thing, as opposed to that running in, the Columbia Daily Herald. That I'm gonna look at that, and I'm not gonna take it seriously.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Go ahead.
And if they're teasing tonight's World News Tonight, with that title, I'm not gonna deliberately go, you know what, that is clearly not appropriate. There's a time and place for being provocative with your leads like that, but when you're trying to present yourself as legitimate mainstream news with a serious flavor, you don't do that. But for some other purposes, that's fine. But if you're doing a documentary for, say, that very purpose, then knock yourself out. But if I'm going to watch a serious news report and someone says something about punching Nazis for fun and justice, I'm going to be like, even if I think it's time to punch Nazis for fun and justice, I'm going to be like, fuck you, I'm not going to watch that.
That's fair. That's fair. No, I'm getting this horrible echo now.
That's probably me.
Oh, did you take your headphones out?
I never put them in.
Oh boy. This could be good or bad, guys. I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope it's usually, it doesn't happen every time, but sometimes and it usually happens when there's a bunch of people on the call that like somebody's got some kind of echo effect and like the whole thing's unlistenable. I hope that's not the case here. Usually, Melissa, your stuff's fine, so I'm gonna cross my fingers.
Okay.
But you also usually have your headphones in, so we'll see. I do like just as a safety measure, because it's hard to tell whose equipment's going to do that, because we all use different stuff, right? It's not standardized.
Well, you can blame me if this one goes in the crapper.
Okay, when I listen to it and it's awful, I'm gonna blame you, Melissa. You're gonna owe me a beer.
Call me out. Punching Melissa for fun and justice.
For fun and frustration. No, no, that's okay. Yeah, so yeah, I do that, to be a little bit provocative. But again, this isn't me reporting the news. This is to get you interested in what people's opinions are on the subject, and I do try to be careful of that. And I'll probably be more circumspect, I think, of that in the future, or I'll try to be. I also try to be a little bit clever too. That I'm not trying to do anything disingenuous. It doesn't necessarily, the interviewer or the interviewee rather of a podcast episode, that doesn't necessarily represent the opinions of Fermenting Opinions, not LLC yet, maybe one day, but it's the idea. Here's your idea. This is your opinion on something. Let's hear it. Let's talk about it. But yeah, I do sensationalize maybe slightly.
Well,
I want people to listen to it.
I don't think you have to defend yourself as far as your own credibility. If people don't like what you're putting out there, then go elsewhere.
Yeah,
it's really that simple. Like, people don't understand how simple this is sometimes.
Yeah, this is currently a free service.
Like, as long as it's a free
broadcast for everybody, for the low price of free. You can hear what David Papiden thinks about stuff,
I mean, if they don't like what you have to say, go elsewhere. If they like what you have to say, stick around. There you go. Sure. It's really that simple. It's kind of black and white and a little simplistic, but
yeah, like we did our last podcast episode was a guy who was who has a background in physics, and I guess quantum physics, was talking about all of reality is essentially a a virtual reality, that the material physical world isn't even real. And he gave his basis for that based on a lot of convoluted quantum physics. And I'm not trying to disrespect his opinion on it, because honestly, a lot of it was over my head. But like, that was some strange off the wall stuff. I don't agree really with any of it. I had sort of foundational differences with him that kind of kept me from following that train of thought. But that was his opinion, and he wanted to voice it. He, political implications of really not living in a real world. How much can you actually hurt or affect other people who aren't occupying real space? There's political implications of that. And we talked about, we had an interview, we're probably gonna have a follow-up at some point. But neither here nor there. That's something that I certainly don't endorse, but that's, that's part of the show, is listening to people I disagree with. Anyway, I think that's enough tangents on all those things for one night. So did you want to touch on the thing you said about some air? I don't want to disrespect what you were talking about. You had talked about sort of a side topic that was more of a tech issue.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I'm so offended by your treatment of it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm terrible.
I know, right? Yeah.
Because I know literally nothing about it. So this is your time, sir.
I was joking. That was hyperbole.
I know. You're fine.
Yeah, I know, but just for the record, for anyone else listening. But
we have one viewer right now, so one live viewer. A lot of these, they don't have very many live views, but I noticed after the fact they do ramp up a little bit, so that's encouraging. But anyway, go ahead.
So I'm going to quickly touch on the Spectre and Meltdown flaws within CPUs or processors or computer processors, however you want to put it. So, and may I mind you, I do work in information security, but I've yet to run into a live example of this in the wild, and I don't think really anybody has, as far as I know. So,
okay.
My Twitter feed might blow up here in the next couple hours one of these days, and when it does show up. But Meltdown and Spectre are... All right, so I could do this two ways. You want me to get really technical, or you want me to get like layman's?
I will. The phrase used when we were discussing quantum physics, when we were talking about quantum entanglement and non-realism. Explain it to me like I'm 5. That's what I want you to do, Brandon. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, and you have to get out the crayons. That's what I'm going to need from you tonight.
All righty. So essentially, the way this works is, so if I'm an attacker and I'm looking to get into your infrastructure, let's say you're a multi-million-dollar or $1 billion business. You're somebody with a ton of money. A lot to lose. And let's say you store credit card information. I want to make this as salacious and dangerous as possible. That's the reason I'm giving this scenario.
Fake news. Go ahead.
I know, right? Yeah, well, well, I'm going to send you some articles after this. I guarantee you at least one of them is going to be called fake news. Just because,
Yeah, post them in the group.
Well, you probably haven't heard of Ars Technica, so.
Actually, I have heard the name, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty common. But
I have a couple of techie friends. It's over my head mostly, but go ahead.
Yeah. So here's the idea. I run multiple servers as this business, and these servers do payment processing, and I have what's called a virtualized environment. What that means is that I'm running a basic computer operating system to run other computer operating systems, all on the same hardware. What that means is that I'm running virtual machines that have varied OSs. That would be like if I had a Windows server on there and a Linux server, if you know what Linux is, and a Unix server and a Mac server and all this other stuff. I have all these different varied operating systems on there.
Okay.
Well, if I'm the attacker, all I need to do is introduce kind of that first piece of malicious code onto that server. So let's say...
How do you do that? How would you do that hypothetically?
All right. So here's an idea. So when you're inputting, say, your order information on Amazon.com, what if I were to put code variables into that same area where you put in your address, let's say?
What do you mean by code variables? Okay, so like I put in my address, it's 123 Maple Street, right? I don't live on 123 Maple Street, but I put that as my address, and you're going to do what to that?
So instead of putting 123 Maple Street, I'll say, get this file from this website, unpack said file, and run this command, or something like that.
In that sort of
in that same
text
area
box, essentially. Okay.
Yeah, in that same text box, and then I passed it through. Well, let's say you had no protections to stop that from happening. So, as far as pass through, it just right to the database, processes it, and does exactly what I told it to do. Well, then once I get that malicious code on your system, the Spectre Meltdown vulnerabilities allow me to pass between virtual machines. So
you're taking advantage of the different operating systems?
So
on the different servers? Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Sort of. So I was on your Linux server where you process your payments and take address form input and stuff like that. And now I get to pass all the way over to your Windows Active Directory server where like all your logins get stored and all that like company kind of thing. You could really screw somebody with this.
That's the soft chewy center, basically, right? Of information.
Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying the hell out of this. It gets a whole lot scarier.
Sure.
And a whole lot nastier. But one of the interesting things about this is, there are patches out there. So, update your operating system regularly. Please do.
Gotcha.
That includes your phone. This would affect your phone. This would affect your laptop, desktop, any kind of server that runs
how much is this sort of exploit vulnerability, however you want to describe it? How much is it being utilized already by hackers? Like how many who's lost their ass in this thing?
Well, really the hardware manufacturers for allowing this ability on all chipsets to be passed through. Gotcha. But as far as hacks, no, there's no confirmed hacks yet. That doesn't mean that's not going to happen. It's when these vulnerabilities come out, within 24 hours, someone's working on something. Good. And at some point, we're going to see the results of that. Because that's what, Tor is for, and I2P, and the darknet, and all that stuff. That's what it's for. Gotcha. A lot of these people, they do that sort of thing on there. That's not the only thing they do on there, but that's one of the things they do on there.
Yeah.
You do a lot of horrible things on there, but that's one.
I can imagine. I think 4chan is the closest I've come to any of that. And that I ran screaming and poured bleach in my eyes.
Another interesting thing about this is, so you're familiar with Intel and AMD as companies, right?
Yes.
So the Microsoft organization or the company set out an update that bricked AMD machines. Bricked basically means is in non-bootable, like you can't do anything with it.
Yeah, I've heard the term, sure. But it's slag, right? You can't use it for anything anymore.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So that update broke all those AMD machines, and I had to retract it and rewrite the whole update. And just so you know, side note, Microsoft no longer has a really good internal testing division. They now test on virtual machines. They don't test on physical hardware. So that's a problem.
Could you explain? I don't want to get too out because a lot of this is already getting technical. Could you explain what a virtual machine is briefly?
Okay.
Like I'm 5.
So, a virtual machine is what I do is I install an operating system onto my server. This operating system's job is only kind of one major job, and that's to host other operating systems.
Okay.
So I install an operating system to install more operating systems on top of that. And the goal of this would be, if you're trying to reduce costs, if you're trying to make the most out of your hardware, there's actually a bunch of other ones, but I'm not going to go into those because I could list this,
So it's software essentially that acts like it's a different operating system. Is that?
It's a software that acts as a environment to host other operating systems.
I see. Okay.
So I'll give you examples for those viewers who like to be keen with Google.
Sure.
VMware ESXi is one of them. Zen Server is one of them. Zen is XEN, not ZEN.
Okay.
Server.
Okay.
And then Proxmox is another one. So that's kind of the things we're talking about as far as operating systems that would host other operating systems, or essentially virtual machines.
Okay.
Yeah, and corporate environments use those a lot. So you may not.
And you're saying it's a money-saving feature.
Not only is it a money-saving feature, it's just a convenience feature from an administrative standpoint in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So I know Melissa may have stated that she had some familiarity with this, so she wants to come at it from a different angle.
No.
That would be appreciated.
She's like, I'm just drinking my wine. There's fermenting and there's fermenting.
I'm fermenting in a different way tonight.
There you go. Na zdrowie.
I'm just over here pickling my liver.
There you go. Well, you're keeping it in good shape. You're making sure it doesn't get lazy on you.
No. Last reports when I had my physical, my liver is in prime functioning condition, so I'm good.
Awesome.
As are my kidneys. So
very good. Nothing wrong with a little fermenting, but fermenting in moderation, folks. At home.
What's that?
Oh, come on. You banning me from my rum bottle? Come on.
As I sip my whiskey.
Yeah. So that's
I've only had one drink for the whole hangout. I drink it because I actually like the way it tastes. It's not to get shithoused, but sometimes that's a
general
unintended consequence. So occasionally it's an intended consequence, but not all that often. I found from experience the more people drink during these things, the less watchable it is on the back end. So I try, I like to partake, but I try to limit myself a little bit because, you don't want this thing to look like a garbage fire afterwards. I think most of you and I learned that very well on election night. We did, Brandon, I don't know if we've mentioned this or not, but we did it was like a 3 or 4 part election live cast on Facebook.
Woof, I was only there for part of it.
Yeah, you left. I think you left by the last one. But we were we would broadcast for an hour and a half, or we were watching election results roll in, and we got this because everyone thought Hillary was gonna win, and we were saying okay, well Trump won this day, yeah. We're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? And it never did, and then we started to have this feeling of dread come over us, and it's like, oh shit, I can't take this, and we got blitz. We were embarrassingly inebriated.
I was already home by then.
I think you had left that after a while. James actually slept here that night. James and his girlfriend stayed in my back room, which is now I converted into a gym, but it's now in the back room back there. They ended up crashing out at some crazy hour of the morning, but we stayed up super late and we got super drunk, and I watched parts of it afterwards, and I was like, never again am I doing that, because that's embarrassing. So I ferment in moderation. I can't speak for other people.
I'm
fermenting in moderation.
Yeah. So,
well, guys,
I guess to wrap up. So, Brandon, you've sort of laid out what the problem is and the fact that they're working on a fix. But in the meantime, I guess the advice is what? Update your operating systems and
just general security awareness is so important for the average user. Here's a rule for just kind of the average person to follow, and that would be, if it looks suspicious, don't click on it. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
Like if I'm saying I'm Microsoft and you call this toll-free number because you got malware, or something like that, or if you get, here's a popular one that I get that's pretty fun. They act like I have a WhatsApp account, which I don't. And they're like, "Oh, I'm trying to connect with you on WhatsApp." It's like, no, you're full of shit. I don't even use WhatsApp. If it looks fake, it probably is.
Yeah, I think most of us who are a little bit more tech. I mean, those kind of, what do they call that? Phishing. Most of that's designed for people who are a little bit less tech savvy than us. Older folks and stuff like that who aren't really internet savvy, and they see something and it sounds, it presents itself as legitimate, and they don't know to look deeper or what to look for as a problem, and that's the way it works. But yeah, guys, use common sense. Update your software. I've been putting off an iPhone update for a while because it's a pain in the ass, and I'm always afraid of losing my apps. But I'm going to do that tonight following this conversation because that sounds terrifying, what you described.
Yeah, because it does affect iPhones, and it does affect all Android devices pretty much. It affects just about every device that's out there for the most part. There's very few that aren't affected.
Gotcha. Well,
yeah.
Well, then we've had something informative tonight as well. Guys, update your stuff. Be aware. Thank you, Brandon, for explaining all that. Like I'm 5 because that's the way I needed it. I think we had a good talk. I probably pontificated a little bit too much tonight, but I enjoy hearing myself speak. So there you go. But Brandon, Melissa, thank you for coming out. I think it's about time to wrap. And you guys have a good night. Please check us out. Obviously, we're here on our YouTube channel. We're at fermentingopinions.com. We have a Facebook group and a Facebook public page. Please join or follow us there. And check out the podcast. We're on iTunes, and I think Beyond Pod is the Android version of where you can get our podcast, Fermenting Opinions. And all that to say, I'm David Papiden. Thank you, Brandon and Melissa, for coming out, and you guys have a good night.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you for having us.